In the spring of 2014, Colchester, the oldest recorded town in Britain, stood as a lively and bustling city, full of history, stunning architecture, and lively museums. With a population of nearly 150,000, it was loved by locals, students, and tourists alike. Among these residents was James Atfield, a 53-year-old father fondly known as Jim. His friends and neighbors described him as a kind, approachable, and ever-jovial person, always ready to grab the microphone and enjoy a night of karaoke. 4 years before, Jim's life had taken a dramatic turn when he was struck by a car. He spent 8 weeks in a coma, emerging with severe brain damage, mobility challenges, and no memory of his previous life. But despite these overwhelming setbacks, Jim remained resolutely positive. He dedicated himself to an intense rehabilitation process, determined to rebuild the life he had once known. On the evening of March 28, 2014, Jim visited his favorite local pub, the River Lodge, arriving just before 6 p.m. He enjoyed a few drinks and socialized with the patrons. Around 1 a.m., he decided to head home, taking a familiar shortcut through Castle Park. As Jim lay on the grass, trying to sober up, a man approached him. He asked Jim if he was okay, to which Jim responded that he was fine, merely taking a break to clear his head with a cigarette. The man warned him to be cautious before continuing on his way down the path. At 5:45 a.m., a concerned resident discovered Jim lying in the park, covered in blood and barely clinging to life. Emergency services were called immediately, but despite his fight for survival, Jim was pronounced dead 45 minutes later, just as he reached the hospital. The autopsy results were harrowing. Jim had been stabbed a shocking 102 times, including fatal wounds to his head and even his eye. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms revealed that Jim had fought back valiantly against his attacker. The investigation revealed that the only known interaction Jim had was with a man at 1 a.m., but this witness was ruled out as a suspect. This left a significant window of time between 1 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. The crime took place in the early hours of the morning, in the dark, isolated park, making it difficult for investigators to find evidence. CCTV footage from the River Lodge pub showed Jim arriving, removing his jacket, and sitting alone at the bar. He briefly chatted with the staff, but nothing seemed unusual. When he left, no one followed him out, further suggesting that his attacker had not been at the pub with him. The attack seemed completely random. According to his mother, he was a kind-hearted person who would never start a fight or put himself in harm's way. He was completely non-confrontational. Investigators later gained access to footage from another camera near one of the entrances to Cam Park. The video showed several individuals entering and leaving the area from late evening until 4:20 a.m. These images were released to the media, and the police urged all 23 people captured in the footage to come forward. At best, they hoped someone might recall witnessing something important, and at the very least, it would help clear those individuals of any suspicion.
Meanwhile, we're learning more about James Atfield, described as shy and polite. 4 years ago, he had a car accident which left him with a brain injury that affected his reasoning and speech. He avoided busy pubs and had few friends his own age, and his relatively solitary lifestyle makes this investigation even more difficult for the police. Today, Chief Superintendent Carl O'Malley gave interview after interview after interview, repeated appeals for public help to catch the killer or killers.
I don't think that there is any clear motive for what has happened to James, and we would appeal to anybody who knows anything about this terrible murder to come forward and speak to the police.
The Castle Park area is used all hours of the day and night. And I'm sure that someone would have seen someone there acting suspiciously in the park. If anyone has any information, then I urge them to contact the police. Thank you.
The number of uniformed officers in the area was increased, with the reinforcements brought in from across East Anglia and the Metropolitan Police. Approximately 3,000 personal alarms were distributed to residents who felt frightened or vulnerable. Tension was high, and the entire community was on edge. Jim's case was featured on the popular UK show Crime Watch, hoping to generate new leads, but nothing came of it. 3 months later, the investigation remained at a standstill. Just when it seemed the community was returning to normal, a second body was discovered, bearing striking similarities to Jim's case. On June 17, 2014, 31-year-old Nahid Almanea, a PhD student at the University of Essex, had finished her coursework early in the morning and headed out for her campus lecture. A brilliant student, Nahid had fully immersed herself in academic life and was excelling in her studies. Around 10 minutes later, a local man searching for his missing cat discovered Nahid's body. He described the horrific sight. Her face was severely disfigured, one eye dangling from its socket while the other was swollen. Despite the swift arrival of paramedics and police, Nahid was already beyond help. It was clear that Nahid had been followed and attacked from behind. The killer, overpowering her despite her small stature, stabbed her multiple times in the back and front. Like Jim, she too had been stabbed in both eyes. The brutal force of the attack caused her skull to fracture as she fell to the ground.
Our current investigation is focused around the murder of Nahid Almanea. Nahid was a young lady from Saudi Arabia who was studying here in the UK, living in Woodrow Way here in Colchester and studying at Essex University. The picture that we've built up of her is a young, very intelligent individual who was pursuing her PhD studies and working incredibly hard to further those studies. We know that she left her home address and she went to the area of Hunswick Road and to the shop and past the shops there, the parade of shops, around 10:20 on Tuesday morning. At 10:40 a.m. we received calls from members of the public to say that Nahid's body had been discovered very close to where we are now, here on the Sallery Brook Trail within the Greenstead estate. Unfortunately, as a result of the injuries that Nahid had suffered, she died here and was pronounced dead by paramedics here on the Sallery Brook Trail. Following a post-mortem, we've established that she received a total of 16 stab injuries, and 2 of those alone would have proved fatal. Our inquiries now are specifically focused around searching the area of the Sallery Brook Trail, conducting forensic examinations and also extensive house-to-house inquiries with a large number of officers deployed here in Colchester to provide reassurance to the community and also to give them an opportunity to talk to us. I'd ask anybody who was in the area of Hunswick Road at 10:20 a.m. or thereabouts to come forward and speak to us. We know from the CCTV footage there that there were people in that area in that time, and they are yet to come forwards to us and speak to us.
Nahid sustained 16 stab wounds, 2 of which would have been fatal on their own. The weapon was determined to be a 10-inch blade. Nahid had only moved to the UK from Saudi Arabia earlier that year to study at the University of Essex, living with her brother, who was also a student. She had been thriving in her studies and was just months away from her graduation in August. On Tuesdays, Nahid's brother had early classes, leaving her to walk alone along the same path to campus. Richard Barnard, the head of the university's International Academy, described her as a hardworking, quiet, and conscientious student. Her brother shared the family's grief, with her funeral drawing a large crowd. Nahid had been wearing traditional Islamic clothing, and detectives were considering the possibility of a racially or religiously motivated attack. A fellow student of Nahid expressed his concern, dismissing the idea of a hate crime, but fearing that the 2 attacks might be connected, possibly the work of a serial killer or a psychopath. The similarity to Jim's murder just 3 months prior raised suspicions, though police had yet to confirm any links between the 2 cases.
Officers from across the east of England are now involved in the murder hunt. Police are still searching around the footpath in Colchester where Nahid Almanea was found on Tuesday morning. No weapon has yet been found. Just 3 months ago, a father of 5, James Atfield, was also stabbed to death in a Colchester park. detectives admit they could both have been victims of the same killer.
There are significant similarities between both offences. Both were committed in open spaces that weren't widely used, and both victims died as a result of knife attacks. On that basis, it is an active line of inquiry for us to consider whether or not they're linked. But at this time, the advice and support we've received from the National Crime Agency, together with the expertise that we have here within Essex Police, indicates that we cannot yet safely assume that they are connected.
And it just goes to prove with this latest murder, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, where you are. So everybody's got to be so much more vigilant, not just for their own safety, but they've got to be aware for the safety of other people around them, because obviously for, these murderers to be caught, I think a lot of it's going to depend on information coming from the public. So just everybody has got to be so much more aware of everything and not just look out for themselves, but look out for each other.
It's been pretty much 3 months since Jim was murdered. Police still don't know the motive. Now they say potentially whoever killed Jim may have killed someone else. Do you have faith in the police investigation?
Oh, totally. Yes, totally. I mean, I know they're not leaving any stone unturned. Every bit of information they get, any bit of evidence about anything they find is thoroughly looked at. So, yeah, I have every faith that the police will catch, the people responsible for Jim, for this lady, be it the same or not. It will in time. It's just when.
DCS Warren of Essex Police said that there were obvious similarities between the murders. It is extremely unusual to see an attack of this type. We remain open-minded as to the profile of the offender or offenders, and we remain open-minded as to whether or not the two murder investigations would be linked. He said. He added that they were being treated as separate but parallel investigations, different to Jim's case. This time there were witnesses. A few individuals saw a young man fleeing the scene around 10:56 a.m. With this information, the police released an e-fit of the suspect, describing a young Caucasian male, aged between 18 and 25, medium build, with dark hair. He was last seen wearing a red, long-sleeved jacket with the hood up and dark trousers. Following further tips, police released an image of a yellowish-tan jacket and a bag Nahid had been carrying on the day of the attack. The bag was grey, yellow, and black, which might hold the key to identifying the killer.
Today I'm able to reveal that we are seeking to identify a man who was seen within the area here of the Sallery Brook Trail, and he was wearing what can only be described as a distinctive jacket. The male is described as being in his late teens to 30 years of age. He had thick, dark hair, which is described as mop-like on top, perhaps 2 to 3 inches tall. He was clean-shaven, of average build, and of tanned appearance, not wearing any glasses. As I say, the jacket that you can see here is similar to the jacket that he was wearing, and he was seen on the Sallery Brook Trail walking back towards the Greenstead estate from the direction of the university.
Over 100 officers from various regions, including Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, and Norfolk, joined the investigation, along with profilers from the National Crime Agency. Crime Stoppers offered a £20,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrator. Nahid's former home, where she had lived with her brother, was thoroughly searched. Neighbors were questioned, and almost 300 doors were knocked on during the investigation. A 52-year-old man was arrested in connection with her death, but soon released. 2 weeks later, the police interviewed a 15-year-old boy with a history of knife crime. This teenager, a student at Colchester Academy, had been involved in a shop robbery at knife point earlier in 2014 and had been convicted of criminal damage in 2013. He was interviewed with his mother but claimed to have been at home during the time of Nahid's murder. After his testimony, the investigation stalled again. Nearly a year went by with little progress. Police had interviewed over 900 people, but there was still no breakthrough in the case. No murder weapon, clothing, or concrete evidence had been discovered. Despite extensive searches of the wooded areas and rivers, the lack of physical evidence suggested the killer had taken extraordinary care to cover their tracks, likely wearing gloves to avoid leaving any clues behind. Then, on May 26, 2015, Michelle Sadler called 999. She had been walking her dog near the Salary Brook Trail, the same location where Nahid's body had been found. Michelle was immediately concerned when she noticed a teenage boy acting suspiciously on a small wooden footbridge over the stream. He was staring around, his movements erratic and unsettling. The more Michelle observed, the more uneasy she became. The boy wore a yellowish-tan jacket, dark-rimmed glasses, and what appeared to be gardening gloves. Feeling increasingly alarmed, Michelle turned back and hurried down the path, where she encountered another woman. Together, they decided to return to the spot to check if the boy was still there. When they arrived, he had moved and was now lurking under a tree, crouching and glancing around. Feeling more and more unsettled, Michelle called 999, saying, "I think I've spotted someone suspicious. He's alone, acting strangely in a quiet, isolated area. His jacket looks similar to the one in the news, and it's on the same trail where the other crime occurred almost a year ago. Something's just not right." Just 10 minutes later, PC Loomis, a local officer, approached the teenager. He asked if everything was okay, and the boy explained that he was just out for a walk to clear his head. Loomis immediately noticed the gloves and the thick jacket. Strange attire for such a warm day. When questioned, the boy confessed to carrying a large flip knife. He was promptly taken into custody. The teenager was identified as 16-year-old James Fairweather. This was the same boy who had been interviewed just 2 weeks after Nahid's murder, only to be released without further questioning after claiming he had been at home at the time. Initially, police only wanted to question James about the knife, but during the interview he revealed far more than they had ever expected. To their shock, James confessed to being the killer of both Jim Atfield and Nahid Almanea. The investigators had unwittingly interviewed a double murderer who had slipped through their grasp. James spoke with eerie calmness, admitting that voices in his head urged him to kill. A deep dive into his devices uncovered his disturbing obsession with serial killers, particularly the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and Ted Bundy. He had photos of them on his phone and confessed that reading about them excited him. James also researched other notorious criminals, including Ian Huntley and Myra Hindley. James had even researched a case of a man who had murdered several elderly victims and successfully pleaded diminished responsibility. This suggested that James had already considered how to defend himself if he were ever caught. On the night of March 28, 2014, with his parents asleep, the voices in James's head grew unbearable. He grabbed a large knife, donned gloves, and silently slipped out of his house through a downstairs window. He was now on a hunt to make his dark fantasies a horrifying reality. James wandered for a while before entering Castle Park, located about a mile from his house. It was there that he encountered Jim Atfield lying on the grass. James said he stood still for a moment, watching Jim to see if he moved. But Jim was unconscious, lying on his back. James described hearing a voice telling him he was on a mission from the devil, and then he launched his brutal attack.
Some voices were talking to me, "You need to make a sacrifice or we're going to come and get you, you need to do it." And I saw him, it was laying on the grass, like that, it was like that, just fast asleep, was where he was drunk. Then he goes, he's the one, do it. So I went up to him, "Can I stand up?"
Yes.
Went up to him, stood over like that, and that. So I stabbed him first there, and I'd done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing louder and louder.
James confessed that he was overwhelmed by rage, only snapping out of it when he heard Jim make a gurgling sound, realizing that his victim was dying. At that moment, he noticed a light in the distance, and fearing he might be discovered, he fled the scene. He returned home around 2:30 a.m. The chilling truth emerged. Jim had fought for his life for at least 3 hours before succumbing to his injuries, an unimaginable and heartbreaking thought. The next day, James meticulously washed the knife, then disposed of it by throwing it into the river. His blood-stained clothes were placed in a garbage bag and left outside for collection, as though trying to erase the evidence of his gruesome act. The details of Nahid's murder mirrored Jim's in chilling ways. James recounted that when he saw Nahid, a voice in his head commanded, "They shall not see evil." He confessed to deliberately turning her around, knocking off her sunglasses so he could stab her in the eye. In a disturbingly cold remark, he added that Nahid would have been safe if she hadn't chosen to walk alone that day. James pondered aloud. Why would she ever walk alone, knowing a murderer was on the loose? Over the 11 months before his arrest, James revealed that the voices in his head pushed him to think about killing every day. He admitted that the voices had urged him to commit horrific acts like raping someone, harming babies, and attacking sex workers, even planning to throw acid at his teacher. To suppress the voices, he filled his days with violent pornography and video games. James admitted that he only stayed out of sight because he knew the police were closing in, not because he wanted to stop his killing spree. He expressed no real remorse for his actions, saying he felt a bit sad, but believed the murders were justified, as the victims had committed sins. He took sick pleasure in watching the case unfold in the media, obsessively collecting newspaper clippings and storing them in a plastic folder. In a chillingly matter-of-fact confession, James Fairweather was arrested and charged with murder. Due to his age, his identity was initially withheld. As court proceedings began, James was placed in a secure psychiatric hospital for evaluation, his future uncertain. James's defense team argued that he was suffering from psychosis. James claimed he was not in control of his actions, stating that the voices in his head had taken over his body and mind. However, when confronted with irrefutable DNA evidence linking him to the murders, he reluctantly acknowledged some responsibility for the killings. James Fairweather pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter, citing diminished responsibility, but still denied the charges of murder. The prosecution rejected this plea, and a trial for murder was scheduled.
It was clear medical evidence in terms of that indicated that he knew that his actions were wrong and that he had control, sufficient control to be able to prevent himself from committing 2 such horrendous crimes. And it's on that basis that we'd rejected the offer to plead to manslaughter and determined that we would proceed to a trial for murder.
It is particularly rare for a 15-year-old to commit these kind of crimes.
Incredibly rare, and I think the public as a whole would be shocked and surprised that somebody so young could carry out 2 such horrendous murders. But in terms of the body of evidence that's been presented to a court, and a jury are satisfied beyond all reasonable doubt that he is guilty of the offence of murder of both Jim and Nahid.
After numerous psychological evaluations, his defense team presented the argument that James was on the autistic spectrum. His lawyer described him as a 15-year-old boy caught in a perfect storm of autism, growing isolation, and paranoia, ultimately leading to psychosis and, tragically, murder. However, the judge quickly dismissed this defense. The judge pointed out that autism affects people of all ages, and that it would be unjust to suggest that it predisposes anyone to commit violent acts. The judge emphasized that the murders were horrific and sadistic in ways that were difficult to fully comprehend. James described being bullied in school due to his ears and glasses. He also struggled academically due to dyslexia, and he had never recovered from the emotional blow of his grandmother's death. School sources revealed that as James got older, his behavior became more violent, with reports of him kicking and headbutting other students. The prosecution called upon their own experts to assess James. Dr. Philip Joseph testified that James's claims of hearing voices sounded more like something out of a horror movie, designed to distance himself from his actions. Dr. Joseph found no evidence of psychosis in James's behavior. Another psychiatrist testified that James had shared some of the most antisocial and violent thoughts they had encountered in their career. In April 2016, the now 17-year-old was found guilty of 2 murders. Due to his age, he would receive a mandatory minimum sentence of 12 years. His name was finally made public. As the judge handed down the sentence, he acknowledged 2 potential mitigating factors. First, James had a mental disorder, which, while not granting a diminished responsibility defense, did reduce his culpability. The judge noted that James's autism was only diagnosed after he had been placed in a secure hospital where he remained a patient. He accepted that James's autism may have contributed to his obsessive behavior, fueling his disturbing obsession with serial killers. The second factor the judge considered was James's age. He was 15 years and 7 months old at the time of the first murder, and 15 years and 10 months at the time of the second. While his age was taken into account in the sentencing guidelines, it was still on the younger end of the range, given that the age of criminal responsibility in the UK starts at 14. The judge noted that it was still too early to predict how James's emerging psychopathic personality disorder would evolve. The judge remarked that it was uncertain how James's emerging psychopathic personality disorder would develop over time. However, he acknowledged the support James received from his loving and caring family. Both his mother and father were present in court, standing by him throughout the trial. The judge concluded that this case was a tragic one. In the end, James Fairweather was sentenced to 2 life sentences with a minimum term of 27 years. If he is ever released, he will be subject to lifelong supervision, known as license, meaning that he could be recalled to prison at any time if he violates the conditions of his release. James showed no visible reaction to the verdict. However, his mother wept silently as he was led away. James turned his head briefly, shrugged, and mouthed the words, "Don't give a shit," showing no remorse for his actions.
This is a statement from Jim Atfield's mother, Judy Finch, who is standing next to me. We are grateful for today's verdict and hope now justice has been served, we can begin to move on as a family. On March 29, 2014, our lives were changed forever when my kind and brave son Jim was brutally killed. He had been through so much already, having fought hard to overcome the effects of brain damage suffered when he was struck by a car. He didn't deserve to die. At the time, we had no idea the killer was so young, a fact that makes my son's death feel all the more cruel and unnecessary. James Fairweather is a monster in our eyes, and we will never be able to forgive him. I would like to thank all the police I've had contact with for all their hard work and sensitivity. Also, I would like to thank the media who have supported us during the investigation, keeping Jim's case in the public eye and helping the police with the appeals for information. Journalists have shown us great sensitivity throughout the trial.
James attempted to appeal the sentence on the grounds of his age, but the appeal was rejected, as the judge had already considered all relevant factors. As the case drew to a close, many were left wondering, what if Michelle hadn't made that phone call? She later reflected, "People have told me I saved lives, but honestly, I think I saved my own life. I believe he was waiting for me to be his third victim."
Obviously I got close enough, so when he looked at me, I looked back at him, felt really, really sort of scared, panicked. I turned round, went back on where I was, and that's when I obviously decided I needed to call the police, but I wasn't 100% certain because I thought, you know, if he hasn't done anything, do I or don't I?
And you could have been just seconds away from...
Yeah, if I'd have gone in 5 minutes later, which is what I already knew, where he was in that bush, I know he'd have got me from behind, and I know that, and that's the most horrific part, you know, obviously reading that in the statements, what's come out in court. I'm just very, very lucky to be here.
The community was devastated when Michelle, who had played a key role in capturing James, was denied the reward money. This was because she had made the call directly to the police instead of using the anonymous tip line. In response, local residents pooled their money to show their appreciation for her bravery. Many experts believe that by capturing James, authorities had prevented the rise of a serial killer. James himself admitted that if he hadn't been caught, he would have killed at least 15 more people. The investigators involved in Jim and Nahid's cases would forever carry the weight of the crimes in their minds. Jim, who had spent 4 years rebuilding his life after a traumatic accident, embodied resilience, constantly pushing forward despite overwhelming challenges. Nahid, full of promise and hope, was thriving in university and looking forward to graduation. Tragically, both had their lives stolen in the most brutal way. However, their families remained determined that their legacies of strength, kindness, and perseverance will live on in the hearts of those who knew them. If you'd like to support our channel and help us keep creating content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it.